It was a quiet morning in a small American town, the kind where everyone knew each other's names and nothing much ever changed. The sun had just begun to rise, spreading a soft golden light over the empty streets. Birds sang faintly in the distance, and the smell of fresh coffee floated through the air from a small cafe on the corner. Inside that cafe, a few regulars sat sipping their morning drinks, reading newspapers and chatting about the weather. The old clock on the wall ticked softly, breaking the silence every few seconds. Then the door opened and an old man walked in. His name was Mr. Harris. Mr. Harris was in his late 70s, his back slightly bent from years of service and life's weight. His dark skin carried the story of decades, struggle, strength, and pride. He wore a faded army jacket, the same one he had worn during his service long ago. The fabric was old, but it was clean and pressed with a few medals still pinned on the chest. He had just come from visiting the town's war memorial, where he went every morning to sit quietly for a few minutes. To most people, he was just another old man, but for those who knew him, he was a veteran who had fought bravely overseas. As he entered, a small bell over the cafe door rang softly. He greeted the waitress, a young woman named Sarah, with a warm smile. "Good morning, sir," she said kindly. "The usual," he nodded. "Yes, ma'am. One black coffee, please." He took a seat near the window looking out at the street. His movements were slow but steady. He reached into his pocket to take out his wallet, unaware of the two young police officers sitting at a table in the corner. The officers, both in their late 20s, were off duty, but still wearing parts of their uniforms. They were laughing quietly about something when they noticed Mr. Harris. One of them, Officer Jenkins, nudged the other and whispered, "Look at that guy. Old jacket, fake medals. Probably trying to impress people." The other officer, Carter, chuckled. "Yeah, I've seen guys like that before. Old men pretending to be war heroes. Probably bought that stuff online." They both smirked, not realizing who they were talking about. Mr. Harris didn't pay them any attention. He simply sat there, watching cars pass by, his eyes soft but thoughtful. When Sarah brought him his coffee, he thanked her politely and reached again for his wallet. As he pulled it out, it slipped from his hand and fell to the floor. A few medals that had been tucked inside clinked loudly against the tiles. The sound caught everyone's attention. Sarah bent down quickly to help, but before she could reach them, Officer Jenkins stood up and walked over. He looked down at the medals and then at Mr. Harris with a mocking smile. "You shouldn't wear what you didn't earn, old man," Jenkins said, kicking one of the medals lightly with his boot. The cafe went silent. The regulars looked up from their coffee, unsure of what was happening. Sarah froze, her hand still reaching toward the floor. Mr. Harris looked up at the officer. His face didn't change much, calm, steady, but his eyes told another story. There was a deep sadness in them, mixed with a quiet fire that had not faded with time. "I earned those," Mr. Harris said softly. His voice was calm but firm. It wasn't the voice of a man looking for trouble. It was the voice of a man who had seen enough of it in his lifetime. Officer Carter came over too, crossing his arms. "Oh yeah, and where did you fight, Grandpa?" "The video game wars?" The two officers laughed, their voices breaking the still air. No one else laughed. Even the old clock seemed to stop ticking for a second. Sarah looked uncomfortable. "Officers," she said carefully, "Mr. Harris comes here every day." "He's a good man." "You might be mistaken." But Jenkins just shrugged. "Maybe. Or maybe he's been lying to everyone. Impersonating a veteran is a serious offense." He turned to Carter. "We could take him in for that." Mr. Harris didn't move. He looked straight into Jenkins' eyes, steady and unafraid. Then he said quietly, "Son, you're making a mistake." His voice was so calm that it made the officer hesitate for a moment. There was no anger in his tone, but there was something else, a kind of warning that came from experience, not threat. Jenkins frowned, not sure why that one sentence made him uneasy. The cafe stayed silent. The customers watched, their faces tense. Some took out their phones, sensing that this might turn ugly. Mr. Harris slowly picked up his medals from the floor, dusting them gently with his hand. His fingers trembled slightly, but his posture stayed straight. He placed the medals back into his jacket pocket and looked toward the window again, as if the officers weren't even there. "Let's go, old man," Jenkins said, trying to sound confident again. "We're going to check your record." He grabbed Mr. Harris by the arm, but the old man didn't resist. Sarah stepped forward, her eyes wide. "You can't just—" But Jenkins cut her off. "Stay out of it, ma'am." As they led Mr. Harris toward the door, the bell above it rang again, louder this time. The sound echoed through the cafe, sharp and hollow. Outside, a few people on the sidewalk turned to look. Mr. Harris didn't struggle or shout. He just walked slowly, his hands steady, his face calm. Before stepping outside, he turned his head slightly toward the officer and said once more, "Son, you really don't want to do this." Something in the way he said it made Carter hesitate for a second, but Jenkins just laughed. "We'll see about that." They pushed the door open, and the old man was led outside into the cold morning air. Inside, Sarah stood frozen, the coffee cup still on the counter, untouched. The regulars whispered quietly, unsure what they had just witnessed. No one knew that this quiet old man wasn't just another veteran. No one knew that the phone call he was about to make would change everything that morning. The silence that filled the cafe wasn't just discomfort, it was the calm before a storm. Outside the cafe, the morning air felt colder than before. The sky was still bright, but the mood had changed. A few people had stepped out from nearby shops, watching as the two officers stood beside Mr. Harris. The old man stayed calm, his eyes steady, while Officer Jenkins tightened his grip on the handcuffs. The metal clicked loudly, echoing in the quiet street. "Hands behind your back," Jenkins ordered. His voice was sharp, trying to sound in control. Mr. Harris didn't resist. He slowly turned around, his movements calm and dignified. The cuffs closed around his wrists with a metallic snap. "You're under suspicion for impersonating a U.S. veteran," Jenkins said, his tone mocking. A woman across the street gasped. "Impersonating? That's Mr. Harris. He's a real soldier," she said, clutching her purse. Jenkins ignored her, pretending not to hear. Carter stood beside the patrol car, smirking. "Don't worry, Grandpa. We'll make sure to check those fake medals of yours." Mr. Harris lifted his head slightly. "You don't need to check," he said softly. "They're as real as the blood I shed wearing them." His words carried quiet power, but Jenkins only laughed. "Save the stories for court." Inside the cafe, Sarah stood at the window, her hands shaking. She couldn't believe what she was seeing. She turned to an older customer, Mr. Grant, who had known Mr. Harris for years. "Should we do something?" she asked. Mr. Grant sighed. "You can't reason with pride, sweetheart. They'll learn soon enough." Jenkins pushed Mr. Harris toward the car. A few bystanders began recording on their phones. Someone shouted, "That man's a hero." "You can't arrest him." Jenkins frowned and turned toward the small crowd. "Step back, all of you. This is police business." Mr. Harris looked around quietly. He could feel the eyes of the people on him. Strangers, neighbors, maybe even some who once thanked him for his service. He didn't feel angry. He felt disappointed. He had spent his youth fighting for freedom, and now he was being treated like a liar. He closed his eyes for a moment and whispered something under his breath that no one could hear. Jenkins opened the back door of the police car. "Get in," he said. Mr. Harris hesitated for a second. "Before we go," he said in his calm voice, "let me make one phone call." Carter laughed. "You think this is a movie? You get a call at the station, not now." But Jenkins shrugged. "Let the old man have his call. Maybe he'll call his bingo club." Carter grinned. "Fine, go ahead, Grandpa." Mr. Harris nodded and reached slowly into his jacket pocket. The officers watched closely, hands ready on their belts. He pulled out a small old flip phone, scratched, worn, but still working. He pressed one button. It was on speed dial. The phone rang twice. Then a deep, calm voice answered. "Grandpa? Everything okay?" Mr. Harris smiled faintly. "Hey, Eli, I might need you to come down to Town Square, the cafe near the memorial." The voice on the other end paused. "What happened?" Mr. Harris looked at Jenkins and Carter, both standing impatiently. "Nothing I can't handle, but I think it's time you showed your face around here." His tone was gentle, but there was something hidden beneath, a message only his grandson would understand. "All right," the voice replied. "I'll be there soon." Mr. Harris closed the phone and said softly, "Thank you, son." Then he turned to Jenkins and nodded. "Let's go." The officers didn't think much of it. To them, it was just an old man calling for help. They had no idea who was coming. As they started walking toward the patrol car, the tension in the air grew heavier. The small crowd whispered among themselves. Sarah stepped outside, wiping her hands nervously on her apron. "You really shouldn't do this," she said to Jenkins. "He's a veteran. Everyone here knows it. Jenkins rolled his eyes. "Lady, if he's real, then he'll be cleared. We're just doing our job." Carter added, "Yeah, and if he's fake, we're heroes for catching him." Mr. Harris looked at Sarah. "It's all right, dear," he said gently. "Truth doesn't need to argue." His calmness only made the officers more irritated. They wanted a reaction, but he gave them none. A few minutes later, Jenkins pushed him into the back seat and shut the door. The glass between them reflected his tired eyes. He sat straight, his hands resting on his knees, eyes looking out at the cafe. Inside, Sarah stood motionless, watching him with worry. Then, as Jenkins was about to step into the driver's seat, a black car parked a short distance away. It was sleek, clean, and quiet, not something common in that small town. The driver's door opened, and a tall figure stepped out. He wore plain clothes, a grey t-shirt, jeans, and boots. But everything about him spoke of discipline. His steps were firm, his eyes sharp. "Who's that?" Carter asked, squinting. Jenkins shrugged. "Probably someone nosy." The man began walking toward them, his expression unreadable. The crowd's murmurs grew louder. A few people stepped back, sensing something different about him. The way he moved, the way he looked at the scene, scanning every detail. When he reached the patrol car, he stopped beside it. His eyes met Mr. Harris's through the glass. For the first time, Mr. Harris smiled, a small, proud smile. Jenkins noticed the exchange and frowned. "Hey, buddy, you need to back off. This is police business." The man didn't move. His voice was calm, low, and controlled. "Is that how you treat a veteran?" Carter raised an eyebrow. "Who are you supposed to be?" The man looked at the cuffs on Mr. Harris's wrists, then back at the officers. His jaw tightened. "Name's Eli Harris," he said. "I'm his grandson." The two officers exchanged quick glances. Jenkins laughed nervously. "Oh, the grandson's here to rescue Grandpa? That's cute." Eli didn't smile. His tone stayed quiet. "You should take those cuffs off now." Something in the way he said it, calm but deadly serious, made Carter take a step back. Jenkins frowned. "Or what?" Eli's eyes didn't blink. "Or you'll regret not listening." The crowd grew silent. Even the air felt still. Jenkins forced a laugh, trying to hide his unease. "Are you threatening an officer, tough guy?" Eli just looked at him and said, "I don't make threats. I make promises." The words hung heavy in the air. Jenkins didn't know why, but for the first time that morning he felt a chill run down his spine. Mr. Harris sat quietly in the back seat, his calm smile never fading. He whispered softly to himself, "Told you, son. You're making a mistake." The street was silent now, except for the hum of engines and the faint buzz of people whispering. The air felt heavier, like the calm before a storm. Eli stood tall beside the patrol car, his eyes fixed on the two officers who had handcuffed his grandfather. His face showed no anger, but there was power behind his stillness, the kind that made people step back without being told. Mr. Harris sat quietly in the back seat, watching his grandson through the glass. He had seen that same look years ago when Eli left for his first mission overseas. Calm, controlled, deadly serious. Jenkins shifted his weight, trying to act brave. "Look, sir," he said, "we're just doing our job. We got reports of an old man wearing fake medals, so we're verifying it." Eli's voice was low but sharp. "Reports? From who?" Jenkins hesitated. "People talk." Eli took a slow step forward. "You ever think before you act on what people say? That man you just handcuffed, he's been through more than you can imagine." Carter crossed his arms. "We don't care what stories he tells. If he's a real veteran, we'll find out. If not, he's coming with us." Eli nodded slowly. "You already made your decision." "You didn't want the truth, you wanted a scene," Carter scoffed. "Whatever. Step back before I arrest you too." The crowd gasped. Sarah, standing by the cafe door, called out, "Stop this! That's his grandson!" But no one moved. Everyone's eyes were on Eli. He didn't step back. Instead, he reached into his back pocket, not quickly but in a calm, deliberate motion. Both officers tensed, their hands hovering near their belts. But Eli only pulled out a leather wallet and opened it. Inside was a small worn identification card. He held it out. "This is my ID," Jenkins frowned. "And what are you exactly?" Eli's tone stayed flat. "Chief Petty Officer Eli Harris. United States Navy SEAL Team 4 active." The words hit like thunder. The crowd went silent again. Jenkins blinked, unsure if he heard right. You're a SEAL? Eli didn't answer. He just held the stare. His silence said more than words could. Carter forced a laugh. You expect us to believe that? Anyone can make an ID these days. Eli took a step closer, close enough that they could see the Navy emblem on the card and the faint scars on his knuckles, the kind that told a story of discipline, not violence. His eyes never left theirs. You really want to test me? Carter's smirk faded. Jenkins looked uneasy now. Something about Eli didn't feel normal. The way he stood, his control, his presence. There was no bluff in his tone. Then Eli looked past them and met his grandfather's eyes through the car window. Mr. Harris smiled softly and nodded once, a silent signal that said, It's all right, son. Handle it your way. Eli turned back to the officers. You're going to open that door and take off those cuffs. Then you're going to apologize. Jenkins stepped forward. Listen, I don't care if you're the president. You don't give orders here. Eli tilted his head slightly. His voice dropped lower. No. You don't care because you've never had to learn respect the hard way, but you're about to. The crowd started whispering louder now, some recording with their phones. A man muttered, That's the Navy SEAL grandson everyone talks about. Word was spreading fast. Sarah moved closer to the sidewalk, her heart pounding. She could feel something big was about to happen. Jenkins turned toward the car, trying to ignore Eli. We're taking him in. End of story. He reached for the door handle. Before he could touch it, Eli's hand shot out, not fast enough to scare, but precise enough to stop him cold. His grip landed on Jenkins' wrist with quiet force. Don't, he said softly. Jenkins froze. His wrist felt like it was caught in a steel clamp. Eli's voice stayed calm, never raised. You've already disrespected one veteran. Don't make it two. Carter reached for his radio. We need backup, he muttered. But before he could press the button, Eli released Jenkins and stepped back, his hands visible. Call whoever you want, he said. They'll tell you exactly who I am. Mr. Harris watched from the car, his proud eyes shining. He had seen courage in battle, but seeing his grandson stand firm like that made his heart swell. The radio crackled. Carter spoke quickly, explaining the situation. The reply came within seconds, static, then a voice from dispatch. Officer Carter, confirm it. You said the name Harris. Mr. Harris from Main Street? Yes, Carter answered. We detained him for impersonation, and now his grandson... The dispatcher interrupted. Release him immediately. Mr. Harris is a decorated war hero. Silver Star, his grandson Eli Harris is an active Navy SEAL. Do not engage. The street went silent again. Jenkins' face turned pale. Carter lowered the radio slowly. Eli crossed his arms. Now you know. Jenkins fumbled with the car keys, trying to open the door. His hands trembled as he unlocked the cuffs and stepped back. Sir, I didn't know, he stammered. Mr. Harris stepped out of the car, rubbing his wrists. His face stayed calm. You didn't want to know, he said quietly. That's the problem. Carter looked down, shame flooding his face. Jenkins tried to speak, but the words stuck in his throat. Eli glanced at both men. You judged him by his age, not his honor. You mocked the very thing that lets you wear your uniform today. No one spoke. Even the wind seemed to stop. Mr. Harris looked at his grandson and smiled gently. That's enough, Eli. They've learned their lesson. Eli nodded and stepped back, his expression softening. Yes, sir. The two officers stood frozen as Mr. Harris turned toward the crowd. He didn't raise his voice. Never be quick to doubt someone who's walked a harder road than you, he said. You might find you're standing in the shadow of a hero. The people around clapped softly, not loud cheers, but the kind of applause that comes from respect. Eli placed a steady hand on his grandfather's shoulder. Together they began walking toward the cafe. The sunlight hit the old jacket, making the medals shine again. The crowd parted quietly, letting them through. Behind them, Jenkins whispered to Carter, What just happened? Carter replied, still pale, We almost arrested a legend. And his grandson could have ended us without saying a word. Eli heard them, but he didn't turn around. He just smiled faintly and said under his breath, Lesson learned. The tension in the air still hadn't settled. The small crowd outside the cafe stood frozen, not sure what to say after what they had just witnessed. The two officers who had mocked Mr. Harris moments ago now stood insolent, eyes down, their pride shattered. The street, usually filled with morning laughter and the smell of coffee, had turned into a stage for truth. Mr. Harris and his grandson Eli stood side by side near the patrol car. The sunlight touched their faces, one lined with years of wisdom, the other strong and sharp from years of service. It was as if time itself had brought two generations of soldiers together to deliver a single lesson. Eli's eyes were calm but firm as he looked at the two officers. "You owe this man an apology," he said softly. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried weight, the kind of tone that made people listen. Jenkins swallowed hard. "Sir, we didn't know." Eli tilted his head slightly. "You didn't want to know," he replied. "You saw an old man and decided you already knew his story. You saw wrinkles instead of courage. You saw age instead of honor." The crowd murmured, agreeing quietly. Some even nodded. Sarah, standing by the cafe door, crossed her arms and said, "About time someone told them." Carter tried to speak, his voice shaky. "We were just following procedure." Eli stepped closer, his eyes locked on Carter's. "Procedure?" he repeated. "Procedure doesn't tell you to kick a man's medals. It doesn't teach you to humiliate someone who gave everything for this flag." He pointed toward the small American flag hanging from the cafe window. "That man wore that flag on his shoulder long before you ever did." Jenkins lowered his gaze. His mouth opened, but no words came out. The weight of guilt was heavy now. The same crowd that once looked at him with respect now stared with quiet judgment. Mr. Harris placed a hand on his grandson's arm. "Eli," he said softly, "they've learned their lesson." "Let them be." Eli looked at him. "Grandpa, they disrespected you in front of everyone. They need to understand what that means." Mr. Harris smiled faintly. "Respect isn't forced, son. It's earned, even by those who lost it." Eli took a slow breath, then stepped back. His grandfather's calm strength always had a way of softening him. Mr. Harris turned to face the officers himself. His voice was steady, deep, and filled with quiet authority. "You see these medals?" he said, touching the ones pinned to his chest. "I didn't get them by luck. I got them by watching my friends fall beside me, by sleeping in the dirt, by going hungry so others could eat. I didn't wear them to show off. I wear them to remember." Jenkins looked up, his eyes wet. "Sir, I'm sorry." Mr. Harris nodded slowly. "Good, but don't say it to me. Say it to every man and woman who served before you, who you disrespected when you mocked me." Carter stepped forward, his head bowed. "I'm sorry, Mr. Harris, I truly am. I didn't think." Mr. Harris gave a small smile. "That's the problem, son. Too many people act before they think, and too few stop to listen." The crowd was silent. Some people had tears in their eyes. Sarah wiped one from her cheek. Eli crossed his arms, still watching. "Apologies are a start," he said, "but actions matter more." Mr. Harris nodded in agreement. "Then let's teach them something worth remembering." He turned to the crowd and said, "Every day someone like me walks past you, old, quiet, maybe forgotten. But behind those faces are stories you'll never know, stories that made your freedom possible." A murmur of agreement spread through the people gathered there. Then Mr. Harris looked back at the officers. "Next time you see someone like me, don't judge them. Ask them their story. You might learn something worth more than your badge." The words hung in the air like a sermon. Even the wind seemed to pause. Eli stepped closer again, his tone softer now. "My grandfather fought so you could wear that uniform with pride. Don't ever forget that." Jenkins nodded quickly, his face red. "Yes, sir. We won't forget." The crowd started clapping, as slowly at first, then louder. It wasn't a cheer for anger or punishment. It was a clap of respect, for the old man who had faced humiliation and turned it into a moment of dignity. Sarah came forward, holding a fresh cup of coffee. "Mr. Harris," she said with a gentle smile, "your usual key on the house." He smiled back. "Thank you, dear." He took the cup with steady hands, the same hands that once held a rifle and carried hope across battlefields. Eli stood beside him, watching the officers quietly remove the cuffs from the back seat of the patrol car, placing them back into their belts. They looked smaller now, not in size, but in pride. As the two men began to walk away, Jenkins turned back. "Sir," he said hesitantly, "if you ever need anything at all, you can call us." Mr. Harris nodded. "I'll hold you to that." Eli smiled faintly. "That's a good start." The crowd slowly began to clear. People went back to their mornings, but the story they had witnessed would travel far. Phones had recorded every moment. Within hours it would spread across the internet, not as a story of hate, but as one of respect and redemption. As the noise faded, Eli turned to his grandfather. "You didn't need me to step in, did you?" Mr. Harris chuckled softly. "No, son, but I'm glad you did. Sometimes the young must remind the world that the old still matter." Eli smiled. "You taught me that." They began walking back toward the cafe. The morning sun shone brighter now, casting long shadows behind them. As they passed the patrol car, Mr. Harris looked at the reflection of himself in the window, an old soldier still standing tall. "Grandpa," Eli said quietly, "what do you think they'll remember from today?" Mr. Harris looked ahead, his voice calm. That respect is the highest rank of all. And with that, the two walked inside the cafe. Side by side, soldier and SEAL, past and present, both bound by honor. By the afternoon, word about what had happened outside the cafe had already spread through town. People shared the video clips online. Within hours it was everywhere. On social media, in local news posts, and even in text messages passed between neighbors. The video showed two police officers mocking an elderly black veteran only for his grandson, a Navy SEAL, to arrive and set things straight. The title people gave it online was simple but powerful. "The Day Respect Came Back." Inside the cafe, things were quieter now. Mr. Harris sat at his usual table, sipping his coffee, looking out the window. His jacket still rested neatly on his shoulders, medals shining softly in the sunlight. Beside him sat Eli, relaxed but watchful, his eyes following the cars that slowed down outside just to get a look at them. People waved from their windows or nodded respectfully as they passed. Sarah came over with a small smile. "You two have become famous," she said, placing a fresh piece of pie on the table. "Everyone's talking about you," Mr. Harris chuckled. "Famous for drinking coffee? Now that's something new." Eli smiled faintly. "Not for coffee, Grandpa. For reminding people what respect looks like." Sarah nodded. "I've been working here for years, and I've never seen anyone quiet a crowd like you did. Those officers looked like scared kids." Mr. Harris took a slow sip of his coffee. "They weren't bad men," he said softly. "Just proud, and pride can blind you faster than hate." Eli looked at him thoughtfully. "You always find the good in people, even after everything you've seen." Mr. Harris smiled. "That's how you stay human, son." Just then the cafe door opened. The small bell rang again and everyone turned to look. It was Jenkins and Carter. They weren't in uniform this time, just plain clothes. Both looked nervous, like schoolboys about to face a teacher after doing something wrong. Sarah crossed her arms. "You've got some nerve showing up here," she said. Jenkins raised his hands. "Please, we're not here to start anything. We came to make things right." Eli stood up slowly, but Mr. Harris touched his arm. "It's all right, son. Let's hear them out." The officers walked closer, stopping a few feet away from the table. Jenkins cleared his throat. "Mr. Harris, we wanted to say sorry again. What we did was wrong. We disrespected you, not just as a man, but as a soldier." Carter nodded quickly. "We were stupid. There's no excuse. After everything you did for this country, we treated you like a liar. We've been suspended for what happened. But honestly, we deserve worse." Mr. Harris looked at them, his expression calm and forgiving. "You've already punished yourselves more than anyone else could," he said. "The shame you feel, and that's what changes a man." Eli watched quietly. He wanted to be angry, but his grandfather's words softened him. Jenkins pulled something from his jacket pocket, a small box. He opened it and placed it on the table. Inside was a new set of medals, cleaned and polished. "These belong to you, sir. We had your originals restored. We wanted to give them back properly." Mr. Harris stared at the medals, then looked up at them. His voice trembled slightly. "Thank you. But those weren't just pieces of metal to me. They were memories. You can't polish what's already clean in here," he said, touching his chest. Jenkins swallowed hard. "Still, it's the least we could do." The cafe was silent. Even the clock seemed to pause as everyone listened. Eli finally spoke. "You two made a mistake, but owning it, that takes guts. Most people would run from what they did." Carter nodded. "We've learned more from that one morning than we did in all our years on the force." Mr. Harris smiled faintly. "Then something good came out of it." Jenkins took a deep breath. "The chief wants to hold a ceremony tomorrow. For you, Mr. Harris, to honor your service. And he asked if you'd be willing to speak." Mr. Harris looked surprised. Me, I haven't spoken at one of those things in years. Eli grinned. Maybe it's time you did. Sarah clapped her hands together. Oh, that would be amazing. You could tell everyone what really happened, not the angry version, but the true one. Mr. Harris chuckled softly. All right then. Maybe one more story won't hurt. The next day, the town square was packed. Flags lined the streets and people gathered in front of a small stage set up near the war memorial. The same officers who had once mocked him now stood beside the mayor, waiting to present him with an official apology. Cameras flashed. News reporters held microphones. When Mr. Harris stepped onto the stage with Eli by his side, the crowd rose to their feet. The applause was long and heartfelt. The mayor handed him the microphone. Mr. Harris, he said, we owe you not just gratitude, but respect. You reminded us all that heroes walk among us, quietly, humbly, and with pride. Mr. Harris nodded and took the mic. He looked out at the faces before him, young, old, black, white, all gathered together. I'm no hero, he began. I'm just a man who did his duty. The real heroes are the ones who didn't come home. But today isn't about me. It's about respect. The kind of respect that doesn't fade with age or color or uniform. The kind of respect every human being deserves. The crowd was silent, listening intently. He continued. Yesterday, 2 young officers forgot that lesson. But today they stand here not as enemies, but as men who learned something important. That honor isn't written on a badge or a medal. It's written in how you treat others. He paused, looking at Jenkins and Carter. And I forgive them. Because forgiveness is the first step to understanding. The crowd broke into applause again, louder this time, standing not just for him, but for the message he carried. Eli stood beside him, proud and silent. He didn't need to say a word. His grandfather had spoken for both of them. As the ceremony ended, Mr. Harris turned to Eli. You see, son, he said, smiling, sometimes the best battles are fought without weapons. Eli nodded. And you still win them, Grandpa. They stood together as the flag above the memorial waved gently in the afternoon breeze, a symbol of everything they had fought for, respect, justice, and peace. The day after the ceremony, the whole town felt different. There was a quiet sense of pride in the air, like people were finally looking at each other with new eyes. The video of Mr. Harris's speech had gone viral, not just across the state, but across the whole country. News anchors called it the speech that taught America respect. Mr. Harris didn't think much about the fame. He was an old man who still liked his morning simple, coffee, a walk to the park, a wave to the mailman. But something inside him had changed. For the first time in years, he felt seen again, not as just another old face in the crowd, but as someone whose story still mattered. That morning, Eli dropped by his grandfather's house. He was wearing jeans and a plain t-shirt, not his SEAL uniform. He wanted to be just a grandson today, not a soldier. Grandpa, he said, stepping inside, you're trending again, over 2 million views overnight. Mr. Harris chuckled, shaking his head. 2 million people watching an old man talk. Guess the world really has changed. Eli smiled. They're not watching an old man. They're watching a hero. Mr. Harris gave him a soft look. Heroes are people who do what's right when no one's watching. I just said what needed saying. Eli nodded slowly. That's exactly why it matters. Before they could talk more, there was a knock on the door. Mr. Harris opened it to find Jenkins and Carter again, this time with the police chief. The chief was an older man with kind eyes and a strong presence. He tipped his hat respectfully. Morning, Mr. Harris. May we come in? Of course, said Mr. Harris, stepping aside. The chief looked around the cozy living room, decorated with old photos, books, and a folded American flag on the shelf. You have quite the history here, he said softly. Mr. Harris smiled faintly. Plenty of stories, Chief. Some good, some not so much. The chief nodded. Sir, we came to thank you. What happened at that cafe has started something important in this town. The young officers in training, they've all watched your video. We've added a new part to our training program based on your message. It's called Respect and Duty. Eli raised his brows, impressed. That's a great step. Jenkins nodded. We told them everything that happened. No lies, no excuses. They needed to know what pride and arrogance can cost. Mr. Harris's eyes softened. "You boys are learning fast," the chief smiled. "We were wondering if you'd help us teach it, Mr. Harris. Maybe once a month you could come talk to our recruits about service, respect, and discipline." Mr. Harris blinked, surprised. "Me? Teach police recruits?" "Yes, sir," said the chief. "They'd listen to you more than anyone. You've seen the best and worst of people, and you handled both with grace." Eli grinned. "You'd be perfect for that, Grandpa." Mr. Harris thought for a moment, then nodded slowly. "All right, if it helps make better men out of them, I'll do it." The chief extended his hand. "Thank you, sir." After they left, Eli looked at his grandfather. "You really are changing things. You turned one bad morning into a lesson for the whole town." Mr. Harris smiled. "Sometimes God uses the smallest sparks to light the biggest fires." The next week, Mr. Harris visited the police academy for the first time. The recruits, all in neat uniforms, stood in straight lines as he walked in. They had seen his video, but seeing him in person made them stand taller. He wasn't just a veteran to them, he was a symbol of what honor looked like. When he began to speak, the room went silent. "Some of you wear this uniform with pride," he said, looking around. "And you should. But pride can turn dangerous if you forget what it stands for. This badge," he said, pointing to one officer's chest, "isn't power, it's responsibility. The moment you forget that, you stop serving the people and start serving your ego." The recruits nodded quietly. He continued, "I wore a uniform too, long before most of you were born, and I learned something the hard way. Respect isn't given by age, rank, or medals. It's given by how you treat the next person you meet. Remember that and you'll never lose your way." When the session ended, the recruits clapped, not because they had to, but because they meant it. Afterward, one young recruit, no older than 20, came up to him and said, "Sir, my grandfather served too. I never understood why he was so quiet all the time, but now I think I do." Mr. Harris smiled and placed a hand on his shoulder. "He wasn't quiet, son. He just spoke through his actions. The world forgets to listen to silence sometimes." That night, as the sun went down, Mr. Harris sat on his porch with Eli. The street lights flickered on, and a soft breeze moved through the trees. Eli leaned back in his chair. "Grandpa, do you ever wish things were different? That people didn't judge so easily?" "Mr." Harris looked out at the darkening sky. "Wishing doesn't change people, son. Showing them does. Yesterday they saw what disrespect looks like. Today they saw what forgiveness looks like. Maybe tomorrow they'll pass it on." Eli nodded slowly. "You turned anger into peace. Not many people can do that." Mr. Harris smiled gently. "Peace isn't something you find, Eli. It's something you make, one heart at a time." They sat together in silence, watching the stars begin to appear. The town that once looked past the old man now looked up to him. Children waved when they saw him on the street. Strangers thanked him for his service. The same officers who had once mocked him now called him Sir with true respect. The lesson had spread far beyond one cafe, one street, or one town. It had become something bigger, a reminder that kindness and respect never grow old. Eli turned to his grandfather and smiled. "You know, Grandpa, for a quiet man, you sure made a lot of noise." Mr. Harris laughed softly. "Sometimes silence echoes the loudest, son." And as the night settled over the town, their laughter carried into the calm, mixing with the sound of the crickets, two generations bound not by words, but by understanding. Weeks passed, and the little town that once barely noticed Mr. Harris had changed forever. Everywhere he went, people greeted him warmly. Some wanted to shake his hand, others simply nodded in quiet respect. Even children would stop playing to wave at him as he walked by in his old army jacket. But the change didn't stop there. The story of Mr. Harris and his grandson had spread far beyond their small community. News channels had picked it up, calling it the veteran who taught a town respect. A few even called it the coffee shop redemption. Veterans from all over the country started writing letters to Mr. Harris, letters filled with gratitude and tears. One letter said, "You spoke for all of us, Mr. Harris, for every soldier who came home and felt forgotten." Another said, "You reminded the world that respect doesn't retire, Mr." Harris read every letter carefully, his eyes often misting with emotion. He never saw himself as a hero, but he understood now that sometimes one person's story could speak for thousands who couldn't find the words. Eli often came by to visit, helping his grandfather sort through the growing pile of letters. "You've become an inspiration, Grandpa," he said one evening. "People are listening, they're actually changing." Mr. Harris smiled softly. "If one heart changes, that's enough for me, son. The rest is just a blessing." Soon, invitations began arriving from schools, community centers, and even military bases. Everyone wanted Mr. Harris to come speak, to tell his story, to share his wisdom. At first he was unsure. He didn't like the spotlight, but Eli convinced him. "They don't want a celebrity, Grandpa," Eli said. "They want a man with truth in his voice." So he went. His first visit was at a local high school. The gym was packed, students, teachers, and veterans all waiting quietly. When he stepped up to the microphone, he didn't read from a paper. He just spoke from the heart.